Thank you for joining me for this presentation of fake news and how to avoid it. Or alternatively, as we will find out why later on, hate fake news, you'll probably share it anyway. I'm excited to give this presentation here today. Fake news has kind of been a topic that has interested me for quite some time. I've attended a few different sessions at conferences such as ISTE about fake news, and more specifically, what causes it to become a problem, and what we can do to try to avoid it in the first place. And so this presentation here will get a chance to look at some of the things that make up fake news, and as well as a helpful acronym that will be used to as a strategy to help students and even adults avoid fake news and sharing fake news in the future. So here's what we know about fake news. Most students don't know when it's fake. And this is something that I like to point out to students when I present them a similar presentation is that looking at the source makes a difference. And if we're talking about a study that comes from a major university like Stanford, we can give them some credit for the prestige that they as a university have. The other thing that I like to point out is that reputable sources, sometimes we just need to know what they are. This includes like the Wall Street Journal, which is a very reputable news organization that does take a lot of time and effort to verify the stories that they print or that they publish online. But we know that it's not just a problem for students. Overall, nearly 60% of people using social media will click and share a headline without actually reading any of the content. And again, I like to start by pointing out that where this information comes from. And it's coming from a study done by Columbia University, which is an Ivy League school. So, again, another one of those sources that we should just recognize as being very top notch and very credible. The question then that was asked of this study in an article by Conscious Vibe was, why do most of us assume that we get the whole truth from a single headline? And even when we know for sure that there are so many misleading headlines out there, that we'll still share it without actually reading the article for context itself. So part of what we're looking at here then is, why do people fall victim for sensationalized headlines, which kind of promote that concept of fake news? And the article for By Conscious Vibe pointed out perhaps five different reasons or characteristics. Sorry, I got a bee flying around, on why that might be. The first is shortened attention spans. I love this infographic that's here that shows the decrease of attention span of an average human in the last 22 years, and comparing that to a goldfish, which now apparently has an attention span of 1 second higher than what average humans do when looking at articles and information online. So that's definitely part of it. We don't have the attention to be able to read a full article. The second reason is information overload. Because of the sheer abundance of information that is out there and available at our fingertips every single day, that is just it's a shortcut. It becomes much easier for us to just assume that a headline is going to be true rather than to read it for the full context, because as the internet has started to alter our brains have difficulty keeping up with the sheer amount of information that's out there. And we've evolved to adopting a strategy of taking short bursts of focus before we move on to the next thing, which then as we see, kind of reinforces the shortened attention span situation that we discussed just a second ago. Fourth reason is confirmation bias. I'm going to share a little bit about that on the next slide, particularly how it relates to ideology. But people who share headlines that they see that already can seem to confirm what they already believe are going to be more likely to share it because of their confirmation bias, that they're looking and seeking for things that already confirm what they want to believe is true. And this is dangerous because it leads us into a situation where we are constantly looking for things that confirm what we know is true, even if we're presented with accurate information or more accurate information that contradicts what we already believe. We're going to be less likely to accept it. And fifth is that writers of headlines are taught how to sensationalize headlines, to get attention, to get people to notice their article, because the more clicks and the more shares that they get online means more revenue. It brings the numbers there, and advertisers are looking for numbers when they're trying to determine where to put their advertising dollars. So when we talk about confirmation in ideology, or the likelihood of a person to lean more politically left or democratic or politically right, Republican, and to share those sets of ideals and values that those political groups share, when we look at that and how they perceive confirmation bias, I like to look at this infographic here from Pew Research Center. Again, another one of these nonpartisan research organizations that really devotes a lot of time into making sure that the studies that they do are scientifically performed and are going to be statistically valid. And so, again, I like to remind students that it's another one of those organizations that we can give more credit to than some others. And in this study done by Pew Research here, they asked people, that were Republican or leaned Republican, or Democrat or leaned Democrat, what they thought about information that they found online that seemed to kind of make them have red flags that go up. And they found that in these types of stories, both Republicans and Democrats, in nearly similar amounts, sought to verify the facts of the news stories themselves. This is great. This is exactly what we would like to see from this. Several of them said we would stop getting news from a specific outlet that was giving us bad information, or we would change the way that we use social media. And again, we could see that those numbers between Republicans and Democrats are fairly similar. However, the study went deeper and found that while people were good at identifying when they needed to fact check stories themselves, it became a question about whether they trusted people of the opposite ideology to do the same, or whether they were any good at it in the first place. And both Republicans and Democrats said that the people of the opposite party were bad at it. So they don't trust their peers' ability to be able to find that bad information, which is an even bigger risk because it can further lead to more of that confirmation bias when you assume that what you know is right, and then therefore the opposite must be false. Sensationalizing headlines is another problem here, why people are also looking to click on these different stories without fully reading them and then share them. So I tested this out using the website that you see linked on the bottom, to create headlines that have a higher emotional marketing value. In other words, the typical the English language contains approximately 20% of these EMV words. And when you combine them correctly in such a way, you can lead to headlines that people are going to be more likely to click on, even though the content inside might be exactly the same. So, using this tool that they had on this website here, I tried out a few different headlines for this presentation. I decided to go with the fake news and how to avoid it because I thought it accurately reflected what this was going to be about. But that only scored a 28.6% on that EMV scale. Whereas the headline "Hate Fake News," you'll probably share it anyway, garnered an 87.5% rating, meaning that if I wanted people to actually read this, I probably should have gone with the more sensationalized headline. But then again, that just kind of goes to prove the point of why we need this information in the hands of our students and even other adults as well. Before I get into the strategy here that we're going to talk to try to combat fake news, I think there is an important note that needs to be addressed here too, and is the difference between fake and biased. Right? There is a difference. Fake is something that is not genuine, it's counterfeit, it's made up, it is intentional, that they're trying to deceive somebody out of knowing what are the true facts. Whereas bias is someone who's predisposed to make judgments either in favor or against something or someone because of that emotional commitment that they have, and it's not based on really any rational consideration. So what we could then say, and I like to point to this quote here by Eric Palmer, is that critically analyzing what politicians say is fundamental to democracy. Okay. Politicians are biased, just like every other human being is biased. So if a politician says something that is not true, pointing out their factual error is not out of bounds. We should be pointing out to our politicians when they get things wrong. And that noticing that language has been misused is not necessarily foisting someone's political view on anyone. So by telling someone that they are wrong does not mean that they then must be giving fake information, that maybe they're giving a spin on some sort of information. So it doesn't make an article or source fake, but it might mean that it's biased. Is it still important to understand the bias? Yes, because then we should take that into account when we decide whether or not to give credit or truth to something else. So let's get into here this strategy, which I'm going to say where I get this information from is from a site called How to Inform, or H2I, and you could see the link to that site here as well. And their strategy is an acronym called INFORM, and it comes from a university out of Illinois. How to Inform, or we'll take that acronym INFORM, to help give us, that mental reminder of what are some good strategies and tips to avoid fake news. The first letter I stands for investigate and identify. We want to investigate the source of the article, reading the article thoroughly, not just the headline, because we're looking for things that make sure that the source of the information is coming from a legitimate means, like for example the Wall Street Journal or Stanford University or Pew Research, not just something that has the name news in it, because it doesn't necessarily mean news. Great example here is this one on the bottom left, America's finest news source, The Onion, which, if you've not seen The Onion, it's very funny. It's a very satirical look at current events and current issues. But I'm pretty sure that they don't have a daily readership of 4.3 trillion. So we need to be skeptical when we see things that say they are from a news source, doesn't mean it is news. Where can we go then to determine some of the legitimacy of these different sources? Well, one of the things that you can look for is in the byline. Legitimate articles tend to have real authors, and that those authors will share what gives them authority or expertise in order to share the information that they find. Another great source is to look at if it's coming from a website, either it's about or it's FAQ links that are on the website. Usually you find that by scrolling all the way to the bottom of the homepage, and you'll see that they're listed there. It's also important here to hang on here 1 minute. I've got more bees. I'm coming right back. Knowing your intended audience is also critically important. As this example here shows, an article by ASCD, and it says in its About section that it is looking to target educators with its audience, which can definitely make a difference depending on who that target audience happens to be. N stands for narrative and tone. Consider the tone of the article that the narrator is presenting. Does it make sense? Does it seem believable? Is it kind of that too good to be true? So, in other words, resist the urge to share those things that on first reading are just too good to be true. Those are the things that require more in depth investigation. And also consider what was the intent or the purpose for the article or the site to be published in the first place. Was it to inform, to persuade, or to entertain? Here's some different examples here in this first one that talks about, have you heard about these furries? That people say that they've told schools that they need to have a litter box because they identify as a cat, and those litter boxes need to be placed in the bathrooms. There is nothing here to verify or support this story. In fact, it is fake news. And the people that have shared it are doing so because they want to draw attention to the fact that they disagree with gender identity and people claiming to be of a different gender than they were born, and not really anything to do with accepting legitimate facts. The next example that you see on there gives some different headlines that actually come from 2016 and the few months leading up to election day between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. That the important thing I think to think about here is that these stories, like the Pope endorsing Trump, or WikiLeaks confirming that Hillary sold weapons to ISIS or other countries, were these sensationalized headlines that were just not true. And that the total engagement of people with fake news stories in the 3 months leading up to Election Day in 2016 made over 1,000 or over 1.4 million clicks than did sources from mainstream news. Just pointing to the fact here again that people are susceptible to those clickbait or share bait headlines. F stands for fact or fiction. Can you find or verify the facts within the article? Do you have doubts about the claim? If it is a legitimate article, the author is going to credit their sources both in the story and cite their sources near the end of the article. So, for example, here you see some references that were at the end of one of the articles I used when researching for this presentation, that you could go to and you can verify, did the person writing the article use the content correctly that the original sources provided? And if so, that gives more credibility to the claims within there. It doesn't mean that articles that don't have these citations of sources are going to be illegitimate. It just means that they require greater scrutiny. Sometimes using a fact checking website, which I have linked here in the presentation, and you'll be able to see them at the end here in the resources section, is going to be one way that students could find out if what is being presented is true or not. An example from PolitiFact that I found was that there was a supposed tweet by Donald Trump shortly after the death of Queen Elizabeth that said, "I never told anybody, but she knighted me in private." This was not something Donald Trump ever posted. It was created by a fake account and shared by people from that fake account that picked it up and spread it. And this was proved to be very false, according to PolitiFact. And so, checking these different websites about things that could be false is an important strategy that can be used. There's also other things that could be looked for in the article itself, like is there a lot of spelling or grammatical errors? Are they trying to type in all caps, kind of like they're yelling at you? Or do they use things like excessive punctuation? This is trying to distract you from the content that they're actually presenting, because they know that it is not totally authentic or even real. O stands for opinion and context. Recognize the bias in the opinion of the media source itself. If you're looking to try to find balanced information of current events or current news stories, I suggest a site called allsides.com. And it's a really neat site that it takes headlines from media sources, and then the headlines, it gives you the headline and then it encourages you, of course, to go to the actual article itself, that compare from different organizations that lean left. They'll have one story from that media outlet. They'll have one from the right side, and it will give you a headline and a news story from that perspective. But then it also has one that is more neutral based upon that media organization, and whether they tend to be liberal or conservative or somewhere in the middle. If you're looking to find out more about the media themselves, like for example, if I wanted to look up the BBC, where does the BBC fall on that political spectrum, to the left or to the right? I could go to this site right here, and it has all different media sources on this spectrum. And it's pretty complex, and I'm not going to show it to you here, but I definitely encourage you to look it up yourself, and you can find even more local things. Like I put Care 11 in there and see where they rated compared to other media, which then gives you a good idea to, it doesn't mean that it's fake, but at least it makes you aware what the bias of that media outlet is. Next is an important part here as well is to recognize that we are all humans and we have our own implicit biases. And that whenever some piece of information or content makes you feel politically self righteous, like you want to spike that political football, that's when you need to be extra careful about sharing because there's a likelihood of misinformation somewhere that's being shared. And don't fall guilty of sharing that stuff just because it makes you feel really, really good. And I know I've done that before as well. But now I really try to, if I'm presented with something that I really am like, yes, I want to believe that, that's when I spend extra time because I know it kind of conflicts with my own bias. Then the next thing here is, could that message be offensive to anyone? And if it is, it's probably representative of fake news, and we should just really avoid those as well. I'm not saying that we can get rid of them entirely because there is still free speech, and people are definitely welcome to share their free speech on social media as well. And here's an example of one that was posted, and I'm just going to move it here, but forewarn you, if you want to skip ahead, you certainly may. Came from a Twitter account, White, or Instagram account, White Lives Matter, and you can read what it says here from 2015. I'll give you a few seconds here. So as you could see, we're probably not going to trust information that comes from that site because we can't deem it to be anything factual. It is all based on opinion and attitudes of the group that chose to show it, which is not going to be something consistent with what we would want, what we would expect of our students. R stands for reliable and credible. Confirm if a source is trustworthy and not satirical. For example, if it's coming from The Onion, we know The Onion is a satirical site. It's just one of those things that we should know. And if you don't know that, then by all means go to the media source spectrum that you we looked at, and it can give you some of that information as well. But we can do a little bit of that ourselves, right? Using some of our own common senses. Are the claims that are within the article believable? Do they provide you with links that actually work and take you to information that confirms their story or at least their perspective of it? Do the people that they quote even exist, and are they considered experts within their fields? Do they have a particular bias, and can you find the sources, like we had mentioned on a previous slide? The next thing that you want to do is to see if these claims are verified by other sources. Check your facts. If it is confirmed in major news outlets, we can give it more credibility than ones that aren't. There's a great example here that I show on the screen from 2016. It came from a parody site called WTOE 5 or TOE 5, right? That was then picked up by other fake news sites that also shared it here about the Pope endorsing Donald Trump, but no other major news outlets picked up this story at all because they all did their homework and found out that this was from a fake site, but yet others that posted it on Facebook got it to spread very widely. So really do your work on that. And I think the important thing here to remember about this slide is that it's okay to remain skeptical and not share information until you can verify that it is true. And finally, M stands for misleading or manipulative. Is the information or content that you're looking at here designed to misinform, disinform, or malinform someone? And looking at the information that's on that the graphic that's here, misinformation are those things that it's incorrect, but it's being presented unintentionally. Someone unintentionally shared information that wasn't accurate. So it wasn't their intent to harm or mislead. Disinformation is knowingly creating or spreading incorrect information because you are trying to deceive someone about what the story really is. Then you have malinformation, which is disturbing because it's sharing information with the shock value, intending to cause harm to some person or some group. And so looking at these different things and identifying which of those things that it happens to be can be very important. So these are the strategies here from the acronym INFORM that can be used to help avoid fake news. And there are some great examples that I'm sure people are already doing, but I think it's helpful for students anyway to have this strategy, this acronym that they can remember in helping to identify it. So now here, what I have left in these last few slides are some informative things or some resources things that you may want to use with your students. This infographic here that I found a few weeks ago from EAVI, I think does a great job of breaking down the different types of misleading news that's out there. Everything from propaganda and satire to misinformation, conspiracy theory things. And if you look at it here, not only does it describe it, it also, with using colors, describes the type of hurtful impact that it might have. And with the use of symbols, design identifies the motivations behind someone trying to use it. Knowing those motivations could go a long way too in helping to identify something that is fake, whether it's misinformed, disinformed, or malinformed. I mentioned a little bit earlier about the fake news detectors, and so here you see some links to some of the ones that are out there that you can use to share with your students about um, helping them to verify fact and fiction. There's also several games that are out there that help to teach students about fake news. The one I know best is Factitious, where it gives you a headline and a story and a source of some story, and you have to determine whether it's fake or real. And the more you get right, the more points you get, that sort of thing. Bad News is not one that I've played before, but I have done Fake It to Make It, which is a little bit more in depth and requires some time, but it really takes you behind the scenes of what it's like to create fake news as you become the founder of a fake news website and try to write sensationalized headlines and get people to want to run ads on your social media platforms because they click on it and that sort of thing. Then a couple of other ones that compare sources on the same topic. I talked about all slides before. Another one is one called News Compare, and these can be used again to help you verify different sources as well. Some other additional things, the FBI has put out a public service announcement recently as it relates to manipulation using social media and fake news before the 2022 midterm elections. And you'll see some of the tips that they give there would fit within that INFORM acronym as well. Next on there is Crash Course. That was started the series of YouTube videos by John Green about history and his brother Hank about science topics. Well, they've really expanded and now reach other areas, including a course that they have that was recently finished. It's not with John or Hank on media literacy. That's also very good. That draws attention to how the media does try to deceive people. If you're looking for another presentation here, I got some good information from Robbie Barber for a presentation that he had given. And then I include a few video examples here that you could use with students. They're satirical, but they you can use that informed strategy here when you're thinking about these different examples and what makes them fake news. And then, of course, I want you to believe that I have some credibility here too. So, just like other legitimate authors, to include the sources where you get your information, and that's what you see here as well. So, I hope you enjoyed it. Of course, please reach out to me should you have any questions. And I look forward to seeing you at another Tech Tidbit sometime in the near future.